All right, more card reveals. We got dual class cards, a dual class legendary, another legendary, tons of cool stuff in this video.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
Starting off here with Disciplinarian Gandling, new legendary dual class card for Warlock and Priest. 4 mana, 3/6, solid base stat line, and after you play a minion, destroy it and summon a 4/4 failed student. So this card's kind of got some crazy promise, right? First off, let's talk about lackeys. We're in a lackey world where lackeys have these great battle cries. You don't necessarily care as much about the 1/1 body. It's fine. But what if you can turn a 1/1 body into a 4/4 instantly when you summon it? That's a ton of upside on Gandling, and they're cheap enough that you can kind of play a few of those with Gandling, and it doesn't feel like much of an extra tax to summon this 4 mana 3/6, because that's a fine stat line for a 4-drop to boot. Now, on top of that, we've also got a very natural Death Rattle synergy with Gandling. You summon an egg, like the egg we're going to talk about later in the video, which I already reviewed and did not speak about in context of Gandling, but you drop an egg, you're going to destroy that egg, you're going to summon not only whatever Death Rattle comes out of the egg, you're also going to get a 4/4. And then you've got things like, just normal Death Rattles that aren't eggs, say like a Loot Hoarder. Summon a 4/4 and draw a card. That's pretty amazing for 2 mana, as long as you're willing to pay the Gandling tax of 4 mana. And that's really the only limitation for this card, because clearly if you get a Gandling down and you can follow it up with powerful plays, it's going to be a big, awesome sort of turn. But at 4 mana, it makes it a little bit hard, because if you're playing a really high tempo deck like a Zoo deck that might be running eggs or cheap Death Rattles or lackeys, you might be wanting to play those earlier and then following them up. Whereas with Gandling, you kind of have to play him first and then follow up with all that other stuff. So it shifts your priority for your kind of egg or Death Rattle synergy or lackey synergy more towards the mid game instead of the very early game, which might be a small limitation for how well this card can work. But, it's still sticky enough, I think, as a 6 health minion. There will be times you can plop it on 4, expect it to survive for a full turn. I think it's also the sort of thing you can just play a little bit later in the game with a bunch of small minions, and you're happy to make a big 7-8 mana swing turn as a reload. But it's not necessarily like a hyper zoo or hyper tempo card. I think it moves more into like mid-rangey or Highlander decks in particular, but pretty clearly being able to trade in instant Death Rattle value and shifting small bodies into huge bodies with additional battle cry or Death Rattle synergies along the way seems to set this card up really nicely for some big, powerful plays. It's just, is that mana awkwardness going to be a limitation that prevents it from seeing, an entire deck built around it, or from being played in like a variety of decks? Maybe it only fits into 1 or 2 as a pretty powerful card, just not a centerpiece and not a focus that you have to rely on. Just a big card when you draw into it. So that said, I think Gandling certainly has upside. He certainly has some power here, but he's not perfect. He's not meta defining necessarily. Just a really reliable, powerful card in certain decks and situations that is notably, of course, limited to 2 classes. I think Warlock is a more obvious fit right now, particularly with the egg we're about to talk about in a little bit. But Priest certainly has a lot of cheap Death Rattles in the past as well. I could see that happening again. And Priest can use stats on board really nicely. So Gandling seems to fit well in both, just maybe a bit of a Warlock bias, but a powerful, if a tad limited card nonetheless. Infiltrator Lillian, a new rogue legendary minion. 4 mana, 4/2 stealth, Death Rattle, summon a 4/2 Forsaken Lilian that attacks a random enemy. And a fun little card here telling the story of Lilian Voss, I guess, and how she becomes a Forsaken Undead Lilian. She must have infiltrated Scholomance and died. So, first glance, I thought, oh, this is just like kind of a piloted shredder. That's sort of weird for a legendary. And I was a tad underwhelmed from both the power level standpoint and kind of an epic legendary feel of a card standpoint. But at second glance, there are a few unique aspects here, right? Number one, she does have stealth, so that creates some interesting components where using that 4 attack is going to be much more reliable. If you want to go face, it's going to be much easier to go face because your opponent may not be able to clear it. Or if you want to take great trades, you can set up this nice 4 attack to do that preemptively. And then beyond that, her Death Rattle attacks a random enemy when it's summoned. So, for instance, it can squeeze in an extra face attack, perhaps sometimes if your opponent's clearing it on their turn, or you could use it to like push through a taunt in a single push. If you got like an 8/8 taunt in the way, you can have Infiltrator Lillian attack, and then the 4/2 might hit that taunt and clear it. Alternatively, if there's a 4 health taunt, it kills your first half of Lillian. You might just get an extra 4 face damage on your turn as well, when this otherwise wouldn't be able to attack. So essentially, it allows you to squeeze in an extra 4 damage to some random target, sometimes beneficial, sometimes perhaps bad, but it's nice that it happens immediately. So that does ramp up this card. And, at the end of the day, it is still just 2 4/2 bodies, which is a limitation here, and I think a lot of people have looked at this one and have been a tad underwhelmed. Like, yeah, of course, Piloted Shredder was nuts in its era, but today Piloted Shredder would not be a card that sees play. I don't think it's just not holding up to the crazy power spikes of Hearthstone that exist right now. And at first glance, I didn't think Infiltrator Lillian did either, but I do think there's a couple lines of play here. So, of course, she's got like stealth and death rattle synergies, and those are both things that Rogue has utilized in the past, not necessarily to great effect. But I think more importantly, perhaps, is that I think she's a really good aggro card. If you're looking to push a lot of pressure and damage, I think Lillian can do that. It's almost like she's a true silver champion that can go like 2 or 3 for 1 with minions or removal. So it's a true silver that might get to hit face a few times or a couple times, but your opponent has to still deal with the stats of it. It's not automatically losing its durability. And as I started to think about it that way, I was like, okay, I kind of get it. This is more of a high pressure card, maybe just 8 damage to the face, maybe more if your opponent can't deal with all the aspects of this. So that suddenly makes a lot more sense. If you think about it as a board maintenance card that's trading too much, then it just doesn't line up. But if you think about it just smorking really hard, I see a potential line for this card. I still don't think, it has the raw output of a lot of crazy powerful cards in Hearthstone these days. It doesn't necessarily live up to its legendary moniker from a power level standpoint right at first glance, but I think this could definitely see play in a really fast, aggressive rogue deck of some sort. So moving on here to a Demon Hunter card. It's Cycle of Hatred, a new 7-mana spell. Deal 3 damage to all minions. Summon a 3/3 spirit for every minion killed. So essentially a big board Hellfire style clear here. Doesn't hit face, of course, but as far as board clears are concerned, similar. And for stuff you kill, you get a 3/3 back. Now, keep in mind, that's also stuff that you kill of your own. So if you had a couple 2/2s on board, you just wanted to send those face, basically trade them in for some 3/3s while also resolving your opponent's board. That's certainly something you can do with this card. So another huge opportunity for a big swing with a card like this one. Kill your opponent's stuff, summon a bunch of your own. And swing cards in Hearthstone right now are great. The challenge for me with Cycle of Hatred is that it's a really expensive swing card at 7 mana. That's huge, particularly because I don't know if 3 damage is enough by the time you get around to turn 7. Your opponent's going to be summoning bigger stuff most of the time. And as we currently see it, the big reloads, the big wide token boards are coming down sooner than that. They're hitting turn 5, turn 4, turn 6. So is this good against like a Mount Seller on occasion? Like, yeah, it clears the Mount Seller's leftover stuff, but it doesn't deal with the Mount Seller. That's exactly what I mean. Now, Spell Druid may not be a thing for the next year and a half, but it could, and that's really just representative of the fact that higher health stuff comes out by turn 7. There's 8 health stuff out there, and Cycle of Hatred gets stuck in those scenarios where it's not especially good. Now, of course, you can combine this with Moarg to up the damage a little bit, but then you're talking about a 2-card 9-mana removal combo, right? And it just keeps getting harder and harder to find the breakpoints where this one makes sense. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if this was in that 4-mana spot like Hellfire, it would be insanely broken, crazy strong, right? Way better than something like Duskbreaker, but it can't live there, so you got to bump the mana up. And by the time you do, those breakpoints just don't make as much sense anymore. So will this be totally fine, randomly generated off of Vulpira's or whatever other random spell generation? Yeah, of course. This will have its moments in games where it's really, really impactful in those moments. I think it's really checked, though, when it's included in deck lists. Like, it's going to be hard to play this one. Maybe in a Highlander deck, it would squeeze in just fine when you need to find more room. But we know Demon Hunter can do bigger, faster, better things than this already. So how is this going to make sense in the future? I think cards like Blade Dance and Chaos Nova are just more important for Demon Hunter's stabilization. Even really Immolation Aura is fine, because you don't really need all these extra 3/3s on board necessarily if you're pressuring so well regardless with weapons and damage. Just clearing the board to stay alive is enough while you smork them. The additional 3/3s are a bonus that's really unnecessary for the class in most cases. So next up here, let's talk about the Steel Dancer, a new dual class card for Rogue and Warrior. It's a 4-mana 4/4, and the battle cry summons you a random minion with cost equal to your weapon's attack. So if you, for some reason, have a Gore Howl equipped, this is going to summon you a 7-drop. That kind of sounds insane now that I think about it, because Gore Howl is a card. But more likely, right, you're looking at weapons that you're equipping in the early game from, say, turns 1 to 3, and then you're probably happy to play this on 4 as a tempo card. So more regularly, your attacks are going to be somewhere in that like 2 to 4 range, I think, when Steel Dancer comes down. So the common outcome here will be that it summons a 2-drop, 3-drop, or sometimes maybe a 4-drop. I think in Rogue in particular, it's possible to get the Scimitar out on 3, Hooked Scimitar on 3, if you can combo it somehow, and Steel Dancer on 4. That's a 4/4 and another 4-drop, which is pretty nasty. But usually this will summon you a 2-drop. And I think that's really where the problem with Steel Dancer lies, is that 2-drop's probably not good enough to make this card worth it. You know, again, Hearthstone's in a crazy spot. We need big stuff. I don't think this is crazy enough to make a cut in a deck. It's also just conditional. You have to have that weapon equipped or this becomes a dead card in hand. So if you didn't hit that early weapon, if you didn't hit the Corsair Cache, this one's not going to work out all that well for you. Not to mention Corsair Cache got nerfed so that it doesn't adjust attack anymore, which would have been great for Warrior. Corsair Cache on 2, one of their 3-mana weapons on 3. It has 3 attack, and then Steel Dancer summons you a 3-drop. That's cool, but that broke. He got nerfed. And I don't think Rogue has it any easier necessarily either. So in Hearthstone right now today, this doesn't really look good to me. Now, of course, we don't know what weapons are going to be printed in the future. There could be a high attack, like 1 durability weapon that's like a 4/1 or a 5/1 or something that shows up to empower a card like this to make it really good on curve. And that would help make Steel Dancer feel relevant. Like, yeah, if this summons you a 5-drop on curve, like that's going to be worth it. That's a really big, powerful play. So, you know, there's hope for cards like this one for sure. I don't want to just totally write it off because right now it looks limited to me. But even in that scenario, right, you still have to hit that weapon. You still have to commit to all these lines. You can't pivot. It doesn't have rush necessarily. You can't react. So even in the like ideal non-existent scenario right now, I think it's got a pretty low ceiling. Like I don't think this ever just wins games or defines a deck or anything like that. So at best, a mediocre card. At average, probably a fairly weak card. So now let's move over to the Brittle Bone Destroyer, a 4-mana 3/3 dual class card for Priest and Warlock. Battle cry, if your hero's health changed this turn, destroy a minion. This is such a cool way to tie these two classes together. So instead of like losing health or restoring health, it's just if your health changed at all. So it's perfect for Warlock who's damaging themselves, perfect for Priest who's healing themselves. It's great. And what it becomes then is basically kind of a Vile Spine Slayer. You do likely have to combo it out in some way with, say, your hero power for either of these classes, and then you get you know, a 4-mana removal card. And Vile Spine was kind of 5/6 sometimes mana-wise. Brittlebone is now, you know, 4/6 as well. Of course, there are other ways to take damage or restore health on board for cheaper than your hero power. You have minions with lifesteal that can do it for both classes. You have minions that damage you for both classes. So, you know, a Soulbound Ashtongue, for instance, would be perfect to pop in there and have on board and then activate this for only 4 mana, which would be great. So the upside is even higher on a card like this. Now, occasionally, I guess you could run into scenarios where if you're a priest or you have like full health, this doesn't work. I don't think that's especially likely, but it is definitely possible and a limitation, I think, for priests specifically. Warlock is always going to have that button outside of maybe Quest where they know they're going to be able to activate this. So I think it has a much higher consistency in Warlock, but it's still probably consistent enough. And, you know, in that case, it's just a really nice little swing single target removal card. We've seen these work in a lot of different scenarios. You know, I guess the question is it going to be better than other removal options available to these classes? You know, does Warlock just prefer having only, you know, Moarg Nether Breaths? And does Priest prefer just like Shadow or Deaths? Do they carve out room for this deck just because of that 3/3 on a stick nature? I think some decks happily will, and certainly Highlander decks are always looking for powerful cards like this one. So it seems like a pretty safe option. I'm sure this card will find some home in one of these two classes in a competitive deck. It just feels really solid. All right, so next up here is Bone Web Egg, a new Warlock egg, 2 mana 0/2, Death Rattle, summon 2/2/1 spiders. If you discard this, trigger its Death Rattle. So, of course, we've seen egg cards work in a variety of different zoo decks throughout the years, even pretty recently in the Rise of Shadows egg package with either Serpent Egg or Scarab Egg. And I'd say this is very comparable when it comes to the Death Rattle summon. You don't get 3 minions like with Scarab Egg, you don't get quite as big of a minion as with like Serpent Egg or maybe even Devilsaur Egg, which costs another mana. But the 2/1s do typically trade really well into mid game boards, I think, and it's still multiple bodies. So as far as I'm concerned, the Death Rattle here is totally fine. And you have this upside here with discard effects. Hey, I love discard Warlock. Let's go. So as we see discard Warlock action today, though, this wouldn't work particularly well because right now discards in Warlock are all about discarding your highest cost card, particularly right now with Hand of Gul'dan to draw you a ton of cards. That's how you really want to play discard Warlock, but that's not necessarily going to be the only discards we ever get. So there is this additional upside. There's still the Soul Fires out there and normal discards as well. They could occasionally high roll this, which would be nice. You get the bonus and you don't have to spend the mana. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, a totally fine looking card. It's not the sort of thing that's guaranteed to work in every zoo deck or guaranteed to be played, but it certainly has utility and could pop into a list. Disciplinarian Gandling is a 4-star card. Infiltrator Lillian is a 3-star card. Cycle of Hatred is a 2-star card. Steel Dancer is a 3-star card. Brittle Bone Destroyer is a 4-star card. Bone Web Egg is a 3-star card. And there we go. That's it. Another card review done. Lots more still to come. And what do you think? What was good? What was bad? What did I get wrong? What did I get right? It's going to be a short list. But share your thoughts in the comments below if you're enjoying these card reviews. Of course, always appreciate a subscribe. I don't care if you like it. Forget about that. Just subscribe if you enjoy them. Get more in the future. But in the meantime, thanks as always much for watching and supporting these videos. It's very much appreciated. And until next time, game on.